Tonight, what we're going to do is a panel. The theme of tonight is, can the children of Abraham get along? And the sub-theme there is religious violence, which is a factor in each of our traditions. And so Rabbi Jay will introduce himself in a moment, and he'll speak for about 15 minutes. And my name is Rich Lang. I'm the pastor here at the University Temple. Then I'll speak for about 15 minutes from the Christian tradition, and then Jeff Siddiqui will speak to us from the Muslim tradition. And at that point, then we will turn it over to y'all. Hopefully each of us will give you a question or some food to chew on in your groups, and have you gather and just chat with each other for about 15-20 minutes, and then we'll come back and have a larger discussion as a gathering. So that's kind of the theme of tonight. So once again, I wanted to thank you for being here. And so, Jay, if you, there is one introduction I do want to make of Jay, because I just owe him a great deal of debt. During the Occupy movement, the day that I was pepper sprayed and I was incapacitated, and they were washing my face out, and I was kind of walking around like this, and I was trying to be macho. No, I'm going to continue walking. And Jay had the most compassionate face ever, and he walked up to me, put his hand on me, and says, "Rich, I'll take you," and we didn't know each other. We had just met. He goes, "Rich, I will take you home." And he literally was hand on my arm, walking me through downtown Seattle to his car, got me home, and I've always been grateful to him for that. But otherwise, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you, Rich. How's that? Can you hear okay? Great. So I just happened to feel very fortunate that I was one who escaped the pepper spray. I happened to be about 10 people down the street from Rich and saw what was going on, and they picked him for some reason. I think he had his clerical garb on, if I'm not mistaken, and that's why they picked you and not me. I was just dressed like anybody else on the street. My name is Jay Heyman. I'm a retired Reform rabbi. I moved to Seattle 4 years ago from San Francisco, where I had worked up until retirement time. My wife is from here and has a lot of family here, and she wanted to move back. So I have long loved the Pacific Northwest, and that's how we wound up here. And it's been a great 4 years. We live in West Seattle. I'm also terribly scatterbrained, so I hope you'll forgive me. My remarks are written out, primarily because if I talk, we'll never get around to the right topic, and the content will be far less than what I had Rich had asked me to deliver to you. I want to start by saying that somebody has stolen my religion. There are people who call themselves religious Zionists, who have mistakenly identified religion with ultranationalism and with chauvinistic fundamentalism. Religious Zionism, that if you don't know the term, those are the people who live on the West Bank, and they call themselves settlers. Basically, that version of Zionism is rebellion, to my mind, against what is most sacred and valuable in Jewish tradition. It is usurpation of Judaism by people who have totally abandoned any belief in the core of biblical values, like love your neighbor as yourself, take care of the stranger, and pursue justice above all other things. Going back in time, if you look at the time after liberation from Egyptian bondage, the ancient Israelites perceived themselves as having been chosen to spread a very special message. And that message was that the liberation of all people is possible. And they built a religion around an obligatory retelling of the Exodus story. That sense of obligation was to spread the message that every human being is created in God's image and as such deserves respect and care. When the prophets of ancient Israel called for justice for the least powerful people in their society, when they called for the establishment of the sabbatical year and a redistribution of wealth in the 49th year, the Jubilee year, they highlighted aspects of the Torah, the Hebrew scriptures, that insisted on ethical behavior. In fact, the biblical language urging the ancient Jews of Israel to become, in Isaiah's words, a light unto the nations, contained an element that would become the basis of that 19th century form of Judaism that I subscribe to, which is called classical reform, one that is based on universal compassion, justice, and peace. So after the Exodus, the next formative experience in Judaism took place among those who had been exiled from Judea to Babylonia. Theirs was a religion of the homeless, the disempowered, and the disenfranchised. In Babylonia, they sought ways to rebuild the myths that would empower them to believe that once again in the future, they would be able to regain their independence as a people. And then again at the end of the Middle Ages, after a millennium and a half, maybe only 1,300 years of persecution throughout Europe, many Jews became intellectual cheerleaders for undermining feudalism and replacing it with unlimited competition in the marketplace. What brought most Jews to Zionism was the promise that Zionism could offer protection against the oppression that they had experienced in Europe. So Zionism started as a national liberation movement, one of people who desperately wanted to move from homelessness and statelessness to being like other peoples with their own national homeland. The Palestinians, who were working the land when the Israelis arrived toward the end of the 20th century, had access to it because somebody had conquered that land from the people who were living there previously and who devised a system that gave them property rights. Previously, Ottoman and other Muslim ownership of the land of Palestine was based on military conquest from earlier Roman and then even earlier Greek ownership, which had, of course, in turn been taken from the Jews, who, of course, in turn had derived it from their own conquests of the Canaanites, the Philistines, and maybe the Hittites, and so on, into the unknowable, distant past. A spiritual solution to this particular issue insists that there is no convincing notion that somebody has got property rights to a particular piece of land. Instead, we need to ask the question about not just this little piece of land in the Middle East, but all the land on the planet, and that is, how are we going to share it effectively so that everyone can have enough and still make our using it sustainable ecologically and responsible. The Arab willingness to close the doors of Palestine when the Jews were seeking refuge from mass extermination in Nazi Germany set the stage for similar insensitivity later when Jews shut their ears to the sufferings of Palestinian refugees. An easy lesson from the Holocaust was that if the God of love was not present on earth, then there was little left to worship except for power itself. And so started this stream of what I like to call settler Judaism that lost its compassion for anybody but other Jews, and that increasingly substituted the worship of power for service to God and humanity. History has shown us the ease with which the Israelis came to see themselves as a lone island in a sea of hostility from surrounding Arab states. So add to that terrorist violence against civilians, and you have a fuse that reignites all of those feelings of hostility, powerlessness, and helplessness that are part of the emotional legacy of the Jewish people. Let's see if I can find where we're going here. So the shame that Jewish men felt who could not defend their own children and their wives through hundreds of years of European persecution often gets internalized into feelings of being weak and fundamentally inadequate. Israel and Zionism erected a counterculture that celebrates the cynical, tough guy who never again will be vulnerable to the ghetto mentality. And this has been the experience of Judaism since the birth of Christianity. So it shouldn't be surprising that the result is that deep, never again mentality that carries not just the pain of the Holocaust, but also the pain of being the target of anti-Semitism for close to 2,000 years. It's interesting to note also that Palestinians sometimes describe themselves as the modern Jews of the Middle East, and at times have told their own national narrative in ways that similarly portray themselves as powerless victims. These narratives enable both Israelis and Palestinians to close their ears to the other side and to ignore the large majorities of both camps who want nothing more than to live in peace. It's these emotional underpinnings that lead so many to show how tough, how realistic, and powerful they are by rejecting any compromise that requires trusting in the humanity of the other side. Any lasting solution to this particular problem is going to have to ensure that each community feels that its most important security needs are going to be met. Now, to complicate matters a little bit further, we have these religious Zionists, these settlers, who have played a key role in the ongoing occupation of the West Bank since 1967. They believe that the state of Israel was brought about not by a secular political movement, but by God's will. And as such, they think that it is absolutely forbidden to return any of that land because it was given to them by God in the Six-Day War. So the occupation to them is not just an expression of military power, but it's also God's manifest destiny for the Jewish people. It was these religious Zionists who created the settlements in the West Bank and who remain the primary moving force between the Israeli occupation and expansionism. A sense of national security that's based on fear, distrust, and domination of others stands in the way of any peaceful, lasting solution. The prophets back in ancient Israel railed against fear, distrust, and power. They said that fear, distrust, and power led to worshiping false gods. For these prophets, recognizing God means respecting and acknowledging that every human being is created in God's image. In our willingness to treat other human beings as expressions and instruments of our own needs, in doing so, we practice a type of idolatry that manifests itself perhaps in our society as predator capitalism, and in Israeli society as ultranationalism on the part of the West Bank settlers. Both are actually manifestations of the same ethos of selfishness and materialism that's dressed in the garb of some higher purpose, like serving the free market or serving one's tribe, religion, or race at the expense of others. So a question to think about is, how are predator capitalism, which worships a type of idolatry similar to what is going on among the settlers of the West Bank, who dress their patriotism in not the free market, but in a higher purpose of God gave us this.
Well, like Jay, I also wrote out some remarks so that I didn't unwind and have you sit here for 30 minutes or until you throw me off the stage. So I started thinking about this question. I was asking myself, why are Christians so violent? And that's a question that I continually wrestle with. Jesus himself and much of the Christian tradition is rooted and characterized by a commitment to nonviolent activism, but the history of the church has been exceedingly violent towards both fellow believers and those it deems infidels. Early on in the Christian faith, there were rivalries and exclusions and punishments for heresy. The word itself means choice, an expression of free thought. Early on, within a few hundred years of the life of the historical Jesus, those who claimed to follow his teachings and to live by his Spirit, nevertheless climbed into bed with matters of state and matters of law and order and control over others. And as we know, the political Roman Empire absorbed the Christian faith, or vice versa, and ruled Western civilization for some 2,000 years, producing in Europeans, from which I descend, I think, some of the bloodiest people who've ever walked the face of the earth. And America, which is Europe's child, even though it was conceived as a world-transforming secular experiment, simply cannot be understood without our own rootedness historically in the Christian faith. So what is it within Christian faith that produces such bloody violence as the Crusades, the justification of the ethnic cleansing of this continent, endorsement and affirmation of countless wars, and today a really strong resurgence of holy war mentality within the military itself, particularly within the chaplaincy of our armed forces? How did the crucified Jesus become the dictator Christ? That's the question that I wrestle with personally. Now, what I'd like to bring to this conversation is an acknowledgement that spiritual experience and religious institutionalism of that experience is necessary for the unleashing of our moral imagination, but it is also a great hindrance in helping us to get along with each other. And so I'll be very brief here, and perhaps we can pick up the particulars in more detail as the night progresses. It seems to me all matters of ultimate concern and intimacy, matters of identity and purpose, begin with experience, not dogma. Spiritually, I think what almost all religious traditions teach is that there is a moment of awakening when one becomes filled with an enlightened, emotional, intellectual phenomenon that simply overwhelms one and consumes one and completely alters one's worldview. For example, if we were fish, the ocean, which at one time we might not have even noticed, suddenly becomes all pervasive, and you simply can't help seeing it everywhere. Or the ocean that was once experienced as scary and mysterious becomes home where I belong. Rather than being a bumpy, chaotic ride, one feels a continual current of benevolent compassion, connecting us to everything and giving us the feeling that all will be well and all will be well and all manner of things will be well. And such experience stretches the moral imagination so that one begins to desire to befriend all the smaller fish as well as all the other creatures of the sea. Indeed, one wants to even perceive the sharks in a new light. The point being that it is spiritual experience, this connectedness, this sense of oneness, this sense of being at home in the whole world, that brings the great turning into life. It is that feeling of being one body together that gives us the courage to connect and to stretch and to reach out to the stranger and the other. I think today, many different forms of Christianity have atrophied imaginations as they focus so desperately on their own survival as a tribe, as churches try to even remain relevant, being popular and cool with the latest technologies and the latest gimmicks of almost becoming a show, an entertainment, an amusement. As churches focuses on a dogma that always functions as a gatekeeper of who is the in-group and who is the out-group. It seems to me that whenever the spiritual experience of connection, of benevolent compassion, whenever that experience is replaced by quests for clearly defined truth or crusades for justice or attempts to build institutional fortresses that explain and guard such experience, whenever this happens, violence becomes the inevitable result. A violence of exclusion, of silencing, even of extermination towards those who threaten one's own interpretation. In other words, whenever spirituality becomes religion, tribalism is inevitable. But the deeper rub is that spirituality requires religion, because religion is communal. It requires an institutional form. What good is it to feel connected to everyone and everything, yet become a hermit, locked up inside your own self, your own selfish experience? The experience of the risen Christ in Christianity compels the believer to connect with others, to connect with the least and the last and the lost, as well as the rulers and the movers and shakers. But as soon as you start to mix it up with others, one encounters friction and factions. So can the children, and that to me is unresolved. I don't have a solution to that. It's a phenomenon that I see in history and that I witness every day. So can the children of Abraham, who share a similar spiritual experience of compassion and mercy, can Abraham's children get along with each other? So far, history has demonstrated that each of our traditions, deeply rooted in techniques and ideologies of compassion and care and mercy, are nevertheless simultaneously quite comfortable with violence. And if we're to resolve this tension between our spiritual experience versus our religious tribalism, we will have to stretch our moral imagination so that we can see that we all belong to each other in the same ocean. It will require our dogma to be placed in service to our actual lifestyle. And so practically speaking, it will require us to practice benevolent compassion as characteristic of our secular life as well as our spiritual. This will have an impact on how we use money. It will have an impact on how we make money, our willingness to work certain jobs, our allegiance to the state, our cooperation with the military, and so on. It will require a certain distancing of our lives, almost as if we were monks, living in but not of the rest of society. Can the children of Abraham get along? We cannot get along until we give up our belief that that my tradition carries an exclusive and elect truth, that my tradition creates an exceptional elect people, that my tradition, as a way of life, ought to be embedded in the laws of the state and the economy. When spiritual experience tries to govern others, violence, I think, is the inevitable result.
I'm always humbled when I'm in the presence of people of cloth. They know so much more about religion, and I'm not a man of cloth. I'm not deeply studied in any religion. I do know Islam a little bit more than most people who are not Muslims, but that's about the extent of it. I ground my belief in reason and logic and compassion, and I cannot believe that there is a God out there who would dispense religion, any religion, without reason, without logic, and without compassion. Those are the founding principles of the practice of any faith. I was thinking as these people were talking, and the question is, can the three Abrahamic faiths coexist? Can we get along? And I'd like to first broaden the question a little bit with a little permission from you. Of course, you have to give me permission. Yes. Can any religions, any combination of religions, can all religions, even non-religion, atheism, can we coexist? Can we live without violence? And I'd like to open that up, examine that a little bit, and I'd like to suggest that it's not religion that fails to coexist with another religion. It's the people. I have never, ever, and I stand by this challenge, and nobody has so far been able to disabuse me of it. I've never, ever seen or heard of a religious war. Ever. Think about it. Yes, religion is used as a cloak and a cover for a war. You know, we will fight the Jews, we'll fight the Muslims, we'll fight the Christians, we'll fight. But the bottom line is we'll fight. The who we're fighting is merely a pretext. And it doesn't matter what part of history or what people you look at, that's the problem. So when we say, can the religions live together in peace, I have no hesitation in saying, yes, absolutely, all of us. Because God is the same. My God, your God, anybody's God, anybody's non-God or a supreme being is the same. If we all acknowledge that we have one God, it's a simple mathematical deduction. If I believe in one God, he believes in one God, he believes in one God, an agnostic believes in one God, Buddhist believes in one God, Hindu believes in one God. It doesn't matter what form we give him, or her, or it. It doesn't matter what name we give him. If each of us believes in one God by logic and reason and mathematical deduction, there is only one God for all of us. It's that simple. So, yes, religions can, all of them, coexist because the one God created them all. And there is no religion that says, go kill everyone else. I know that in among the detractors of Muslims, they have these canned excerpts that they have edited and created partly out of fantasy and partly out of what I call clever editing of half a sentence, where they say Islam, God says go kill the unbeliever. And but the fact is, nowhere in the Quran does it say go kill the unbeliever. What it says is, if somebody is attacking you, if the unbeliever makes a treaty with you and breaks it, then go attack him. If he is attacking you and you've exhausted all avenues of peace, mind you, you have exhausted all avenues of peace. And God says you have to accept peace as long as it is just and preserves dignity of all parties, no matter what the terms. So in Islam, it's clear, you have to be peaceful. Every religion says peace, peace, peace. No religion says, go kill. Because by default, when you look historically, when a religion began, it began with one person. And that one person needed more people. And the more people needed more. And everyone needs the convert to expand the religion. And if you go kill the people before they convert, you don't have any hope of survival. So just apply a little bit of reason and you see that it cannot be that a religion would say, go kill the unbeliever. It is against the survival of the very religion itself. I made some notes so I can kind of stay on track. And I went off track already. When we say can a religion, can the three Abrahamic religions coexist in peace, we get to can humanity exist in peace, way beyond the religious aspect. Because we have the impulse to find someone that we can label as less than us, worse than us, and intolerably different from us. And we need these reasons to justify attacking them. And we don't want to attack them because we just fancy a good shooting match. No, we want to attack them because they have what we want. It could be wealth. It could be strategic positioning. It could be expansion of a national philosophy, the free market, if you will, versus communism. It could be a lust for power. But always, these are the things that cause the war. These are the things that create, and we need it. And I talk about Islam quite a lot. And I say, each of us, all of us, from Mother Teresa to you, to me, these gentlemen here, every one of you, if you can see the gap in my finger, I'll be very surprised, because sometimes I can't see it either. We're that far away from becoming genocidal maniacs. Every single one of us, including Mother Teresa, God bless her soul. All we need are the things that make the ideal mixture for the fire. We need somebody to identify as an enemy. We need to demonize the enemy. He's, worse than Hitler. As Hitler said about Jews, they are TB bacilli. They need to be exterminated. So what do we say? We use the word cancer. And we need to say all this. And then we have to create the threat. They will destroy us. We have to make it an intractable threat. They will kill us because of the way we live. They are against us for who we are. Now, man, that's tough. Because if I'm growing a beard and these gentlemen hate me for my beard and they're the ones with the weapons, I could shave. And we could call it peace at that time. If they hate me because I'm wearing a jacket and I should wear a sweater, man, hey, I'm going to buy a sweater real fast. Whatever the reason is, if it's something that can be changed, we can do it. But if you portray someone as someone who is intractably against your very existence, like we're doing right now about Muslims, they hate us for our freedoms, they hate us for who we are. You've heard this before. What does that put you? Where does that put you? You have to either roll over and die, or you have to kill them, or the fancy, sophisticated terminology we use is stop them before they kill us. So we use these fancy words, but the bottom line is you do. And then the final straw is you have to say, you have to make it a good deed. You have to make it an act of humanity, even compassion, to kill them. National heroism. We must kill them before they can. And genocide can happen right like that. And it's not, the Shoah against the Jews was not the last genocide. Would that it were. We have one every day. Not just by Christians, not just by Jews, not just by Muslims, everybody. Buddhists even are included in this. So it's, oops, I lose my ability to speak if I lose this. Religion exhorts mercy, forgiveness. And in Islam, the basic foundation we have is we know that when we die, God is going to ask one question of us, and that is, what have you done for the least able amongst you? Not the least able Muslim, but the least able amongst you. Again, the religion is based on ethics, on honesty, fairness, mercy, forgiveness, coexistence. It's the people who turn it into an instrument of violence. And to move away from religion, all you have to do is look at the legal code. People here, the courts are full of lawyers on opposing sides of the same issue, saying, no, the law says this. No, Your Honor, the law says this. Which is what we do as religious people. We say, the religion says do this, do that. And it's not just Abrahamic faiths that have a problem with violence. It's internally. Each religion has the problem of violence within us because people demand that grasp of power and they don't want to let go of it. And the easiest way to gain power through history continues to be hate and fear. Create the fear, create the hate, and then the third element, present yourself as a potential Messiah. I will guide you through this threat. But just enough that there is still a little bit of hate and fear left, because I want to continue to guide you through that hate and fear. And so we, in faith, we have our own extremists to battle before we can even consider the extremists of the other faith. We all too often disregard it. Today, and I'll talk to you about today's events, not today, but these days as we're living. You hear in the papers, you hear in the radio, the TV, pontifications by politicians, by people who fancy themselves pundits and fancy themselves as experts on terrorism and on Islam, and they really aren't. They know, they might know more than they say, but what they say is patently false. And what we do is we don't question when somebody says, well, people, to make it palatable, people use the word Islam and Muslim with a suffix or a prefix and say, I'm not really talking about all Muslims. I'm not really talking about all of Islam. I'm just talking about radical Islam and Islam extremist and this and that. And they say he's hijacked the religion. Nobody can hijack religion. Religion is absolute. It's there. It's there in its fundamental reality. People can twist the words around for their own purposes. Nobody hijacks a religion. And nobody questions it. I remember back in the days when Obama was running for his first term, for his first election, McCain was there in a public civil place. Let me know if I'm reaching the 15 minutes, please. McCain was there in a public place and he was talking, and this woman, poor, sincere, distracted woman comes up and, oh John, you must win. You can't let him win. He's a Muslim. And to his partial credit, and this was covered on the TV, McCain said, And the first half sentence was to his credit. The second half sentence made me gasp. He said, "No, ma'am, he's not a Muslim. He's a decent man." And I thought, oh God, he just slapped us again without realizing. I'm sure he didn't think he was slapping Islam or Muslims. People don't. It's like back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, 80s, and God help us even today, somebody talks badly about blacks or about Jews, people don't think twice about it. I mean, it's just normal conversation. And that's what creates the hostility. And what worries me is not whether the Abrahamic faiths can live together without violence. What worries me is that the followers of the Abrahamic faiths allow casual bigotry to continue without ever challenging it. The only reason our extremist talk show hosts thrive and survive is because nobody calls the advertiser and says, if you advertise in that bigot's show again, I will boycott you and I will tell everyone else to boycott you. Man, can you imagine the power of one phone call if you do that? Can you imagine the power of hundreds of phone calls after a show that somebody has Rush Limbaugh or Dory Monson here locally, or Michael Medved, or one of these guys who thrive on promotion of bigotry? Imagine calling those advertisers in that show and saying, no, don't bother calling the radio station. They just think, oh goody, we got ourselves another listener. Call the advertiser. Joe's Automobile Service speaking. Well, I heard you were advertised in that show. If you ever advertise in that show again, I will make sure everyone hears that you support bigotry. Ooh, you think he'll think again about it? And all that has to happen is a few ratings get knocked off and that host is gone. We don't do that. So the question I would put to you is, can the followers of the three Abrahamic faiths or any other faith actually motivate themselves to make that one phone call? To challenge the person speaking, the priest, the politician or whoever, who adds a prefix or a suffix to a thing, to a creed, to an ethnic group, to a racial group, to a religious group, and thereby slaps them and uses as his cover, I was not talking about all of them. I've heard it before. You are a wonderful person, but let me tell you about these other Muslims. And I just sit there and I look at the person and saying, what are you talking about? And again, I'll say it again. It's not the bigots. It's not the violence. It's the silent majority. Germany was not all Nazi. Germans were not all saying, let's kill every Jew we can find. But the majority of them did nothing and said nothing. That's what caused Hitler and the other handful, and I emphasize, handful of Germans to go into a genocidal spree. The rest were just following orders. And we have that today. Our security services, the police, the FBI, the CIA, the drone pilots who are sitting in comfortable chairs in Pennsylvania and Texas and Louisiana and blowing people to smithereens. They're just following orders. They're just doing their job. That's our new thing. We need someone to tell them what their job really is. And that someone is me and you. So, yes, there is a lot of intolerance within our religions too. We need to stop that before I can look at the Christians and the Jews and say, why are they so violent against me? I have to look within. And I have to ask, what is going on? Is someone here preaching the absolute truth, because that's what they do. They say, we have the corner on the truth. You know, if you're a Catholic, then by God, I have the corner on the truth. All the others are hellbound. If you're a Salafi Muslim, then by God, I have the corner on the truth. All the others are hellbound. If you're an Orthodox Jew, same thing. Same thing with all faiths. And somebody has to challenge them and say, no. Even if you disagree with the other religions, even if you believe the others are committing heresy. In Quran it says, it doesn't matter what someone believes or disbelieves. You have to leave them alone. Your only job is to inform them of the errors of their ways. And then your job is done. It is I will determine and show them the error of their ways later. And I'm sure it says that in the Bible, in the Torah, in Ramayana, in Bhagavad Gita, and in all these holy books. So, question is always that. In Islam, we have, you have that eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. And Islam too. It says I'm paraphrasing, of course, that the recompense for an injury is an injury equivalent thereto. But if you forgive, then God loves you more. And this is sprinkled all over. Yes, there are horrible things. Yeah, eye for an eye. But if you forgive, God loves you more. If someone does injury to you, someone, if there is it's always the forgiveness, the mercy part are always there. But again, we have these people who practice their hold on God, knowing full well that God is not going to come down here and saying, hey, wait a minute, why did you use my name in vain? That doesn't happen. So everybody knows that's not going to happen, and they invoke God. I suggest as religions, unfortunately, the only time people of a certain religion can live in peace amongst themselves and with others is when they are minorities and they're rather helpless. Then they don't feel the need to be all that strong and powerful and to force their belief on others. But as soon as you give people of a certain, I won't use religion, certain philosophy, the power to do what they want, they will absolutely do what they want. And it's nothing to do with religion and everything to do with greed, lust for power, lust for money, which again is power. Bottom line, it's always about power. So the question to you is, will you, the next time you hear a statement of bigotry, question it? Just challenge it. If someone uses religion to support bigotry, challenge it. Even if you don't know better. If somebody says, let's say you're a bunch of Catholics grouped together on a sermon and somebody's saying God said this and God said this. Challenge it. What can you lose? Ask them, show me. That's what I do. I'm not an expert on Islam. But when I hear something that goes against my basic reason, my basic logic, and my basic sense of human compassion, I cannot believe that God would have said that. Ask them, I say, show me. And when they show me, invariably they're wrong. Invariably they've or shall I say mal-translated it. Do that. Thank you.
What we do is we break into groups, kind of self-organize, 5, 6 folks in a group, and there's been questions raised on each. Again, the challenging question. Jay, you want to repeat yours? Yeah, you had a great one written down.
It had to do with It had to do with the settler mentality of everything is mine, God gave it to me, and the idea of predator capitalism, and that is that anything that I can take belongs to me.
And the third one is just the spiritual experience of oneness that is common to both believers and unbelievers alike, inevitably finds itself in an institutional religious expression. Those are just three guiding questions. You might want to take it elsewhere, but for about 15, 20 minutes, if you'd break into groups and talk among yourselves, can the children of Abraham get along? Is religious violence inevitable? Is it just part and parcel? Is there such a thing as religious violence? And then we'll come back in about 20 minutes for a larger conversation with each other. Yeah, the question is missionaries, so that's, I guess, usually, have they caused many problems? Absolutely, and there's actually, I can't remember the full name of the book, but there's a great book about Nelson Rockefeller money, and what happened in Central and South America, often using Wycliffe Bible translators, which, I have friends who are Wycliffe Bible translators, and on the one hand, it's a good. It's people who go into a culture that sometimes does not, or actually not sometimes, that does not have a written language. And so the motivation is religious. The motivation is to go into an area and to learn the language orally and to put it in alphabetic form, so that you're actually helping to evolve the culture and giving them a written language and moving from an oral tradition to a literate tradition. And so often governments will want that to happen. And so even if they're not Christian governments, they kind of turn a blind eye and let the translators come in because there's a larger good at stake in society. But then what happens is the CIA gets involved. Literally, and the translators aren't horrible, miserable, ugly, rotten people. Basically, what they do is they get used, and so the information that they're finding out translates not only into intelligence, but it translates into intelligence that goes directly into the databases of what? Corporations. So have missionaries done great harm? Yes. Missionaries have gone into cultures and, obviously have imposed Western norms and mores on other cultures. In terms of Christianity, and I'll stop with this, Christianity has a theology that believes that our interpretation of God, the risen Christ, is already present in all cultures, and so missionaries, at least Methodist missionaries today, tend to go into cultures and basically ask the question, how can we be of use? What kind of development do you need? How can we bring Western technology and so forth? But that's not always been the case. What has happened in the past, obviously, is missionaries that are going in and simply imposing our entire theological apparatus on a society, and guilty.
Could I throw in one comment? I don't know a great deal about the missionary world, but many of us are old enough to remember a couple of films that were just terrific, talking about missionaries who go with the best of intentions and wind up with all sorts of unforeseen consequences. There was a movie 25, 30 years ago, maybe more, called Children of a Lesser God. Fabulous film. And then there was another one, the name of which I don't remember, you all might, about a Roman Catholic priest in Central or Latin America. Is that what was it? The Mission. So great resources if you haven't seen them.
In defense of missionaries, I was brought up in Pakistan, and when Pakistan got its independence, broke away from India in 1947, Pakistan was a very, very underdeveloped area, even compared to India India was a advanced nation compared to Pakistan, because Pakistan was the area where the fringes of the British Empire were. So there weren't many opportunities for the British Empire to establish its grip other than a military grip. And so they didn't bother with an economy or anything. They just kind of left. So the only schools in 1947 were missionary schools. And of course, the government, there's always a symbiotic relationship between missionaries and the government, because the missionaries are there to help mold the mind of the natives and make them more amenable to occupation and imperialism. Still, and I went to missionary schools as I was growing up. They were still not a national infrastructure of schools in Pakistan at the time when I was growing up. And if you wanted a decent education, if you were in a certain strata of society, your children just naturally went to missionary schools. I went to Catholic schools. We had to take catechism every day, by God, and it was literally hammered, no ambiguity, literally hammered and whipped into us. And I forget what I learned, but I'm sure it would come back to me if I see a nun or But having said that, I'll tell you, in general, the missionaries were the most compassionate and giving people. They sacrificed their lives, their health, their individual identities to literally serve the people. Even today, missionaries are on the leading edge of bringing a better health to the people in underdeveloped countries, helping them with eye problems, with teeth problems, helping them with clean water, helping them with education. They fill a very, very important role. The fact that they're abused and manipulated by a government, I suggest to you, is not something that we can say we should blame the missionaries for. Yes, there were plenty of missionary institutions and groups that actively participated in the exploitation of humankind, the witch burning and stuff like that. But I wouldn't lambaste missionaries just for what they are. Wonderful people. I have experienced them, and I hold them in the highest of regard.
I used to think that this was a theological issue, and for many years I worked on the premise that if you could believe in a deity who could actually come out of the heavens and speak directly to you and give you commands and all sorts of reinforcement about that conversation, then that was grounds for standing up and saying, I have God's word that this is the way you're supposed to worship, and anything that I can do to convince you that that's the way it's supposed to be is perfectly okay with the one and only deity who only talks to me. So anybody who subscribes to this notion of an autocratic deity who has divine, verbal, direct revelation to one person who has that, then has the right to interpret that will, that's dangerous, I think. That is, that to me seems to be the basis of, seemed to me, and I still subscribe to it in a large degree, but also, that's also needs to be taken and understood alongside the fact that we human beings are flawed creatures, and we have this notion that we are material beings and that the only thing of worth in the world is what is real, what can be kicked or stood upon or knocked over, and that the only thing that's important in our world is me, myself, the ego. And we're convinced that those two things, our material being and our selfishness, are the most important things in the world. And I think that, combined with this divine revelation from an autocratic deity, gives us the basis of traditional religion. And honestly, I think you are right. I have very little to say to my co-religionists who believe in that sort of a structure. We're worlds apart, and if you look on the internet, there's a site that says these are the most dangerous Jews in the world, and I'm one of them. So.
And I would, I probably have more in common with Jay and Jeff than I do with Mark Driscoll, the pastor of Mars Hill and other conservative branches of Christianity. It's almost in Christianity, I would say, it's almost as if there are two different religions that use the same book and the same symbols, because I don't even recognize the God that I have when I listen to Mark Driscoll preach, and I see the structure of their church, I simply don't recognize that as a spirituality of health. So, you've named the elephant in the room. This is a progressive fest. So,
I'm not so sure, because your position was, if you brought a sampling of each of our faiths groups and said, do these guys represent you? They would say emphatically no. I think that can be applied to any situation and any selection of people. I have been, by Muslims, I've been accused of being too liberal in my religious interpretation. I've been accused of being heretic in my religious interpretation, and I've been accused of being too conservative in my religious interpretation. So I've had the distinction of the whole spectrum being thrown at me. So you could find people who would say, Rich doesn't represent me, and then you could find people who would say, so I think the bottom line is, accept what you have and where you are and just have the discussion at the time, rather than say, how representative are these people? Well, why not? I mean, you said, can I find the Jesus of peace in Islam? Yes, I can. He's there in the book, in the chapter on Mary, and in his other. There's a whole chapter, by the way, called Maryam. So yes, we would find it. Now, I don't think there is any reference to any prophet in the Quran, and there are many by name, which are not referred to in terms of peace. So I don't quite understand your question. Why would the Quran not refer to Jesus as a man of peace? I would challenge, you said the ethic of Islam is the war ethic. Is that what you said? The just war ethic. There is no just war ethic. That is something that is created jointly and shared jointly between the extremists of Islam and the extremists of non-Muslims. Both have a common goal of, not common, but both love this just war ethic idea because it furthers their goal. The extremists on Muslims, it furthers the goal of, just conducting a war, just war, if you will. And the extremists among non-Muslims, because it furthers the idea that, look, Muslims really are the nasty, vicious, murderous dogs that we think they are. There is no just war. In Islam, it is very clear. You cannot have a just war. You have to be attacked. You have to do everything you can to allay the attack. You have to make peace under all circumstances, provided it preserves justice and dignity. And then, if there is still no other avenue, you go into the war, and you have to stop the moment the enemy is no longer able to fight you.
You just described the just war ethic.
Well,
I think what Joshua...
but the way...
I think I can clarify something here.
Yeah, let me just finish. The way just war ethic is used in the Western concept is as if it's something Muslims use to justify continuous aggression. There is no... it's not just war ethic any more than there is a just war ethic in all other religions. And I challenge that.
Well, Joshua, I think what he's raising is a great thorny question, because, and it is what you just said, there is a just war ethic in all religions because it's about defense. Can I defend myself? And you defend yourself just enough to stop the aggressor. What Joshua, though, is lifting up is the tradition. There is a tradition within Christianity that Jesus renounced absolutely the use of violence, so that you sacrifice yourself. You don't defend yourself, and that is in the Gospels. Now, it's not lived by Christians. It hasn't been. Christians devised a just war doctrine based on that very thought that, well, what do you do if you're being defended? You know, if they're raping my wife, you know, the old question, don't you fight back? But there is an ethic in Christianity that the Christian does not defend oneself. The Christian gives one's life away as a sacrifice. And the comment I'd like just to put in there, I'm not going anywhere else with this, because I think it's a deep thought, maybe deeper than I can think. But Moses and Muhammad were both concerned with legislation. They were both concerned with governing a people. They were both basically concerned with creating a people. Jesus wasn't. Jesus his whole ministry was in an environment where that people and that governing structure had already been created. And so Jesus and his whole ministry never had to deal with, quote, legislative issues or how to govern a society, because it was a renewal movement. Moses and Muhammad were creating movements out of nothing. Is that? But the non-defense thing is really offensive if you think about it. The Jesus ethic of self-sacrifice is not something that even most, and this is where Joshua's question is so perturbing, because most Christians do not live that ethic. And start slapping me around, I probably don't live it either. Worse, we say Jesus is God.
So you're asking, you're talking about what traditionally is the basis of these religions. In Judaism, one of the key ideas is that God spoke to Moses. In fact, according to Orthodox rabbinic tradition, the source of the Torah, which is the 5 books of Moses, first part of the Hebrew Bible, the Torah, was revealed at Mount Sinai by God, who spoke it to Moses, and Moses memorized it, and later it was all written down. So it is literally verbatim the will of God for the Jews to do. And it's filled with, the rabbis came up with the idea that it's filled with 613 commandments. Well, that to me is a foundational myth of Judaism. It doesn't mean that it's absolutely true, that people might have thought it was true in another bygone age, but that it is no more true in reality than the Iliad or the Odyssey, or the Gilgamesh. So the entire Torah then is the childhood story of the Jewish people, and it doesn't give us what we're supposed to believe or follow today, because it's filled with all sorts of wars of conquest. I mean, look at the battles that took place with this violence, deity who's prone toward violence and bloodthirsty, telling you to take out your aggression on the Hittites and the Ammonites and every other people in the neighborhood. Those are foundational stories. They're myths, and there is some higher truth in some of the scripture. I find it in the words of the prophets Isaiah, Jeremiah, Micah.
The move. I love your question, because I think it goes to the heart in my own tradition of the conflict between liberals and conservatives, and I think the way I would respond to that is is what I was trying to say in some of my remarks. As soon as experience trumps dogma, which is dogma is a reflection on the experience, but what happens is you codify it and it gets locked into place. But as soon as you make the move that experience is your primary revelation, you have, I believe, you have a basis for humility, because none of although our experiences can be similar, we can all have an oceanic kind of benevolent, compassionate experience, and you don't have to be, quote, religious to have that. That's just, I think it's in every culture. I think it's part of being a human being. That experience is also experienced as gift. And it's kind of hard to make rules and regulations about that. And so my point is, who speaks for God? At some point, when experience is the primary revelation, no one can speak for God. But you can certainly get people like me who are trying to govern a congregation who would want to impose a belief system on that congregation that inevitably ends up looking a lot like me. So I think your question is a question that I personally wish every Christian would take seriously, because the strength of the congregation is for the whole body to become mature and not simply be dependent upon the teachers and the leaders. And so,
well, it's a difficult issue, and I like to approach it from the perspective of both sides in that particular issue have a lot of fault. I don't want to get involved in throwing verbal stones at one another, because it really it's like a schoolyard brawl. One party may be right in one instance, or more right than the other. What we need at this point is to be able to have leaders who will say, enough's enough. We need to get past this, and we need to resolve the problem. And, we've got issues on this planet which make the Israeli-Palestinian issue look like child's play. And we've got the survival of the species at stake, and people are arguing over who owns what piece of dirt. From my perspective, the Israelis in this issue, have so much more power than the Palestinians that it violates. I don't want to be too partisan in this issue, but there's the value that one of the values that I subscribe to most in Jewish tradition, and this will, I think, resonate in other traditions as well. There's a statement in the Talmud in a section called the Sayings of the Patriarchs, that from Hillel the Elder, who said, "What is hateful to yourself, don't do to your neighbor." If my co-religionists in the Middle East would simply live by that particular value, much of the problem would have gone away a long time ago.
I'd say a couple things, and then we'll have to close. If folks want to hang around and still talk, that's fine. We'll break it down, and you can chat for a bit. But I wanted to tie those two together, and the first one I was thinking about is you were laying out with your friend, to me, why it is so important to do justice. And justice means that everyone survives and has the possibility of thriving. And if we do not focus on the eradication of poverty, scarcity, the scarcity mentality that is not just an illusion. I mean, let's face it, all of us are wealthy. Even if you're off the streets tonight, you are wealthy compared to really a large section of humanity. Was it 2-3 billion people live on less than $2 a day? Poverty that unless you've gone there as some sort of tourist or missionary or helper, we have no conception of. But if we can't shift our way of thinking to believe that all 6+ billion of us have a sacred legitimation, a right to exist, if we can't move in that direction, I personally think there's very little hope for our future. And the only thing I know that creates that kind of compassion is relational. I don't think it's an issue of your intellect. And how do we as spiritual communities, my question as a pastor is, how do I create scenarios and opportunities? How do I help facilitate the meeting of the other? And without that kind of spiritual discipline in life, I think we are perpetually going to be violent towards each other. And I loved what you said about science, because we live in this technological, materialistic world as spiritual creatures. And if we don't evolve with the technology, we're doomed. And at some point, I think Dave Corton and others talk about the great turning. Something has to shift in our worldview so that we see that we're all swimming in this same ocean. And here's my frustration. That is so easy for me to say. I am white, I am male, I am way middle class, I am not hungry, I am not starving, and it would take work on my part to become poor. I'd have to work at it. Because even if I lost my job tomorrow, I have a network, I have resources. And the massive, massive injustice, inequities in life, not only call into doubt the existence of a benevolent God, of any kind of potency, but it certainly calls into doubt our capacity as human beings to think outside our tribe. And so those to me, and I don't want to leave everybody in despair, but I think those are really deep questions. And I think that our faith communities, you might have a different type of community, but our faith communities, the three of ours, at their best, what we're all about is the teaching of that the other has a right to exist as a sacred being, just like I have a right. And I think we'll leave it at that. So I wanted to thank you for coming, for being part of this conversation. And again, you don't have to run out of here. You can chat with each other. Any of you that need stamps, I have stamps. I'll share. So, thank you for coming.